Chapter 6. The Symbol of the Ceiba Tree. Sera continued down the hill beside Rick, overcome with guilt about leaving Dak's side. Her best friend still hadn't regained consciousness, and she wanted to be the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes. And who knew what crazy potion that mystic might try without her supervision? But when Rick had stirred her from a restless sleep, he reminded her of Dak's last words about the people inside the observatory. The least they could do, he reasoned, was honor their friend's wishes by checking it out. So here Sera was, trekking down to the observatory. The guilt tightening like a noose around her neck with each step she took away from the cave. "I mean, just look at it," Rick continued. "It's incredible what Kisa was able to do without the help of modern tools." "Wow, it really is," Sera said, rolling her eyes. Rick hadn't stopped talking about Kisa and his new bracelet since they started their walk. He'd already explained his theory about her being the snake charmer from the riddle. He believed she might hold the key to discovering the break they needed to fix. He described for Sera the deep conversation he'd had with Kisa, which had lasted into the morning. Now he was obsessing over the artistic merits of the bracelet she'd given him. Rick was so caught up in Kisa talk, he didn't even seem to notice all the storm damage they were passing. The thick tree branches strewn all over the dirt path, the massive reddish-brown puddles and blown-off roofs, the smaller huts on the outskirts of the village that had been completely flattened. "And it's surprisingly comfortable," Rick said, spinning the bracelet around his wrist for Sera to see. "I never thought of myself as a bracelet-wearing kind of guy, but this thing's a different deal. I really dig it." "I'm sure you do." Sera hadn't known Rick long, but she was willing to go out on a limb and say he was acting out of character. Not that she had time to worry about Rick's character at the moment. Her focus was on getting to the observatory, finding out whatever it was they were supposed to find out, then getting back up to the cave to check on Dak. When Sera looked up a few minutes later, her eyes grew big, and she stopped in her tracks. The observatory. Rick turned around. "I bet Kisa would make you something too if—" "Look!" Sera interrupted, pointing ahead of them. Yesterday, the observatory had been nearly as tall as the temple. Now, Sera was staring at a heap of rubble. "The storm," Rick said under his breath. Sera's body went cold. Most of the roof had been stripped away. The walls were folded in on one another and crumbling near the base. A dozen men, including Ichik, were standing on top of the wreckage, calling out names and carrying debris away, stone by stone. Sera and Rick took off running down the hill. Sera quickly learned that there were 3 elders trapped inside: Kokam, Khan Bohar, and Pakal. They were the reason everyone was working at such a frantic pace. Ichik kept calling out their names and digging through the rubble, trying to determine the location of the voices that occasionally echoed back. Sera and Rick worked right alongside the Mayas. Initially, there were a dozen Mayan men helping out, then 2 dozen, then 3. All of them hoisted boulders nearly as big as their own bodies. Women started pitching in, older children. By late afternoon, there were over 200 people milling around the observatory wreckage, carrying away rocks. Those too young or old to lift debris ladled fresh water from buckets into cups and passed out fruit to those who'd been working since morning and refused to take a break. Nearly every face Sera had seen in the cave the night before was out here now, helping to dig the elders out from under the debris. Soon the sun started to set, but that didn't slow the Mayas, so it didn't slow Sera either. She lifted as many smaller stones as she could manage, carrying them to one of several piles of rubble near the temple. Rick did the same, Kisa now working at his side. Sera occasionally scanned the crowd for Dak, hoping he'd woken up and demanded to join the rescue efforts. She knew that's exactly what he'd do. But there was no sign of him. "Kokom!" Ichik continued to roar. "Khan Bohar! Pakal!" "Who are these people anyway?" Sera asked Rick and Kisa as she tossed 2 grapefruit-sized rocks onto the pile of rubble. "Wise men, right?" Rick said, turning to Kisa. Kisa wiped sweat from her brow and nodded. "They are the scribes of our village." "Why were they in the observatory during the storm?" Sera asked as the 3 of them started back toward the wreckage site. "Only Ichik knows for sure," Kisa said. "Though many believe they were working on a secret project to be studied by the men of Yuknun the Great, king of Kalakmul." His men will be visiting our village in a few days' time. I still can't believe Ichik is a king, Sera said, recalling what Rick had told her on the way down the hill. He never even let on last night. He is our king, Kisa said. But more important, according to Ichik himself, he is a father and husband and uncle. Sera nodded, but she was having trouble wrapping her head around these Mayas compared to the Maya she'd read about. Ichik didn't set himself apart from everyone. She thought that's what all kings did, and it moved her to see everyone pitching in to help rescue the trapped elders. When Kisa broke off to get a cup of water, Sera took Rick by the arm. "Did you ask her about the riddle?" He nodded. "In a roundabout way. Apparently, when she was little, she survived a bite from the deadliest snake in the lowlands. Her uncle said she needed to honor the snake for not taking her life. That's the reason she worked snakes into her jewelry. Seems weird for it to just be a coincidence. I'll keep working on it." Sera let out a defeated sigh. "What are we doing here, Rick? Dak's hurt, and the ring is malfunctioning, and we aren't getting any closer to understanding the riddle. I'm so confused." "I am too, Sera. We just have to keep searching." Sera saw Kisa approaching with 2 cups of water. At least Rick had made a friend, she thought, which made her think of poor Dak, laid up in a dingy cave, alone. Kisa handed a cup to both Rick and Sera, and they thanked her. As Sera finished her water, she heard a small commotion building on the other side of the rubble. She set down her cup next to Rick's and Kisa's, and the 3 of them hurried around the wreckage toward a gathering crowd. "What's happening?" Kisa asked a stocky Mayan woman. "They spotted the scribes underneath the wreckage," the woman said excitedly. "They're alive!" Sera pushed her way around several people to see for herself. Ichik was right up front, calling out, "Pakal, remain calm. We will get you out of there." He turned to the group of men next to him and said, "It's a miracle they're not harmed. Now let's hurry." It took another hour to clear a wide enough tunnel for the scribes to climb out of. Sera watched them emerge, one by one, dirty but otherwise unscathed. The last man who came out was carrying a large tablet of bark-colored paper, which was filled with strange-looking glyphs and paintings. He handed the tablet to Ichik, who looked it over, saying, "How did you survive, Pakal?" Pakal pointed back at the tunnel. "We huddled next to the wall with the ceiba tree. It saved our lives." Ichik smiled and nodded, looking back and forth between the 3 filthy men and the tablet. "It is our good luck charm, as always," he said. "While we were trapped, I decided I will paint the tree onto the first and last pages of the Codex," Pakal said. "I believe it will be a worthy addition." "Yes, absolutely." Sera couldn't believe what she was seeing. An actual Mayan codex. She ducked down so she could peer into the narrow hole. It was dark inside, but once her eyes adjusted, she was able to make out the large tree painted on the wall. She got goosebumps and quickly turned to Rick. "The riddle." "I was thinking the same thing," he said. It was late by the time Sera made it back to the cave and Dak's bedside. He was still unresponsive, though Jasaw seemed to think his condition had improved. Sera wasn't so sure. If anything, Dak's injuries looked worse. There was a lump the size of a softball on the back of his head. The backs of his arms and shoulders were entirely black and blue. "He looks awful," Sera said. "It is not important how he appears on the outside," Jasaw said, waving more incense over Dak's bare chest. "It is his insides that matter, and there is no longer a danger of his brain swelling." Sera stared at Dak. She was beginning to trust Jasaw a little more, though she still wished he could back up his claims with an MRI. Once Jasaw left, Sera pulled out the square and powered it on. She and Rick had ducked behind a huge tree outside the village to study the riddle before trekking back to the cave, but even knowing that the symbol of the ceiba tree was part of this local codex, they were just as lost. The riddle came up, and she read it aloud to Dak over and over, hoping something would jump out at her. "A snake charmer and a clown, a treasure that never was, a gift from the deity Itzamna, from 9.10.5.10.7 to 11.17.2.13.10. Trace the symbol of the ceiba tree toward the truth of the curse. Sera read each phrase a dozen times, but they still didn't add up to anything. And Dak just lay there, unmoving. Next, she booted up the ring. She had been able to get the display working again, but something was still wrong. The ring wouldn't accept any new data. Every time she input new coordinates, she got an error message. It was deeply troubling. Eventually, she shut off both machines, curled up on the ground next to Dak's cot, and closed her eyes. She pushed Dak and the riddle out of her mind, and instead focused on her trip to the cataclysm. She remembered the flooding streets, the blood-red sun, but as soon as she saw herself reaching for the doorknob of her house, things went blank. Again. What had she seen that was so awful her mind wouldn't let her remember? Chapter 7. A New Purpose. Rick stopped pacing and looked over Sera's shoulder as she continued tinkering with the Infinity Ring. He sensed her frustration and he wished there was more he could do to help, but she was operating on a level of physics that was simply beyond him. They'd been huddled behind the cave like this for several hours already, and it didn't seem like they were any closer to a solution. She'd gotten a screen to come back on, but all it did was flash a series of error messages. Rick resumed his nervous pacing. He needed to get down to the village and find Kisa. During another sleepless night, he had decided to ask for her help with the riddle. It went against every historian principle he'd ever been taught, but he was going to show it to her. Maybe she'd be able to decipher something that he and Sera weren't seeing. Sera placed the ring onto the thick grass and clenched her fists. "I figured out what's wrong," she said. "But you're not going to like it." "What is it?" Rick asked. "Basically, the ring rebooted when it hit the ground. Everything is still operational, except the ring forgot what the date is. It doesn't know when we are, and if it doesn't have that data, it can't warp us out of here. It doesn't know what our starting point is." "That's not so bad," Rick said. "We just have to figure out the date?" "Think about it," Sera said. "The Maya have a calendar system, sure, but it's different from ours. The ring's programming is all based on a European calendar, and the Mayan people have had no contact with Europeans." "We'll get it, Sera." Rick figured it was a good idea to put a positive spin on things, even if we have to cross the ocean to do it. Sera shook her head, staring at the ring. After a long silence, she picked it back up and resumed her tinkering. Rick watched, knowing he couldn't tell her the other thing he'd been thinking about all night. How he wouldn't mind being stuck here for another day or two. There was something genuinely special about this place. And while he knew their mission was crucial, Rick wasn't exactly in a hurry to return home. He hadn't told the others yet. Maybe he never would. But their visit to 1850 had cost Rick a great deal. He had been forced to interfere with his own family tree, and that meant he was pretty sure he had no family left in the present day. It also meant he could cease to exist if he ever returned to the 21st century. He wasn't sure which possibility scared him more. He was doing a good job of keeping his emotions in check, but all the uncertainty had hit him the previous afternoon, while he and Kisa were helping clear debris from the site of the observatory. Suddenly, these thoughts had hit Rick so hard he had lowered himself into the mud and covered his face with his hands. Kisa had knelt beside him and patted him on the back and asked if he was okay. But that was it. She didn't press him for details. She understood that there were things about him she would never understand. And she accepted it. And wasn't that what true friendship was all about? Rick realized two things in that moment. One, not counting his fellow time travelers, he'd never had a real friend before, other than his grandma. And two, if Kisa was a real friend, then he should be able to trust her with the riddle. Sera threw her hands in the air. "I have no idea what else to try, Rick. What if we're stuck here forever?" Rick paused a few seconds, thinking about this. How would he feel if they were stuck here forever? The idea didn't bother him nearly as much as it should. "Look," he said, forcing himself to focus. "Why don't we forget about the ring for now and concentrate on the riddle? If we go down to the village, we can ask Itchik about the ceiba tree, and I have a few questions for Kisa, too." The worried look on Sera's face made Rick feel guilty. He'd never seen her so distraught. "Maybe you're right," she said, slipping the ring back into her satchel. "Let me check on Dak, and then we can go." They stumbled into Itchik as soon as they'd made it into the village. He was standing at the foot of the fallen observatory, laughing. "Itchik?" Rick said. Itchik turned to look at Rick and Sera, his grin falling from his face. "How is your friend? His condition is improving, I hope." "Jassaw claims he's getting better," Sera answered. "But he's still unresponsive." Itchik nodded. "My entire family owes him a debt of gratitude. That was my youngest daughter he pushed out of the way." "What are you doing out here?" Rick asked. It seemed more than a little odd that a king would be laughing at his own fallen observatory. "Everything okay?" "Oh, yes." Itchik turned back to the rubble and said, "I was just thinking about how long it took us to build. Many years. The entire village pitched in. We made many important discoveries about the world from inside these walls." "Why were you laughing then?" Sera said. "My scribes were not harmed," Itchik said. "And I believe one's greatest misfortune is also his greatest opportunity. We will build a new observatory now, one that is bigger and better, one that will not fall, no matter how hard the wind blows." Rick wished he could have this kind of attitude about life, too. But it was easier said than done. He looked all around the village, at the series of storm-damaged huts people were already attempting to rebuild, the towering temple, the muddied white road. There had to be a reason Rick, Dak, and Sera had come here. It couldn't be a random mistake. What if they'd come here specifically for Rick? So he could meet these people and see how they live and hear what they believe. Rick looked up when he heard voices. He spotted a group of children hurrying down the path toward them. "King Itchik!" they called in unison. "King Itchik!" Itchik and Sera looked up too. Rick saw that there was a smaller group trailing behind the children. Older kids, teens like him. One of them was Kisa. "King Itchik!" "Yes, children. What is it?" Itchik asked. A boy at the head of the pack spoke. "The men have arrived from the jungle," he said, out of breath as they reached the foot of the fallen observatory. "King Yukum's men from Kalakmul." "They've come days earlier than expected," Itchik said. "Where are they now, children?" "The North Ball Court," the biggest Mayan boy said. Itchik turned to Rick and Sera. "I must go greet the great king's men," he said. "They have come to appraise our learning. You are welcome to meet them too." He started following the children back the other way. Rick and Sera looked at each other. "I'm going with him," Sera said. "Maybe I can find out more about the Codex." "I'll meet you there later," Rick said. Sera nodded and hurried to catch up with the group heading toward the ball court. Rick moved toward Kisa. Before he could even open his mouth to ask to speak with her, she took his arm and told him, "Come with me." Kisa pulled him into an empty hut that no longer had a roof. This hut was much smaller than the one Rick had visited during the great storm. "I don't trust these men," Kisa told him as soon as they were alone. "The king's people?" Rick asked. "Why not?" "Itchik believes they want to study our codex so they can learn from it, but he's too trusting. I believe they want to steal our work and claim it as their own. Everyone knows Pakal is the best scribe in any village." Rick looked out the open door. Several older Mayan women were in an organized line sweeping the road. Men were moving in and out of other huts with ancient-looking tools. "Shouldn't we warn Itchik?" he said, turning back to Kisa. "He won't listen. All he cares about is proving our progress to others." Kisa took Rick's arm. "You need to be careful too," she said. "And the smaller boy who was hurt. They have been known to capture people who look different. I heard they take them back to Kalakmul and shove them in cages. People pay to view them." "Trust me," Rick said, remembering his experiences in 1850. Nobody's putting me in a cage." Kisa nodded and picked up one of the ceiling boards lying by her feet. She stared at it for a few seconds and then turned to Rick with glassy eyes. "I guess I'm just worried for the people I care about. This storm has ruined so many of our homes and our observatory. Everyone is working hard to recover, and here come these men from the richest village in the lowlands demanding to see the fruit of our learning. It doesn't seem right." "I wish I could be more help," Rick said. Kisa shook her head. "You have your own worries." Rick focused on the ground, thinking. No matter what happened to him, he needed to make sure Dak and Sera were okay. He needed to make sure the historian's mission didn't end here. He pulled the square out of his satchel and looked up at Kisa. He waited for her to ask what it was, but she just stared at it, watching him push the power button. "I was wondering if you'd look at something for me," he said. "Of course," she told him. "But I've never seen anything like that. I may not be any help." He typed in the password and pulled up the riddle, then held the screen up for Kisa to see. When she gave him a blank look, he blushed. Of course she couldn't read it. It was written in English. He translated for her verbally. "This is why you asked about snakes in my jewelry," Kisa said. Rick nodded. "Do any of the lines make sense to you?" "I don't know what the clown could be, or the treasure, but I know Itzamna, of course. He is the god who gave us our calendar, and the numbers you read, those are calendar dates. One of them is today. The other is far into the future. Knowing one, it is a simple matter to deduce the second." The hair stood up on Rick's arms. "One of them is today?" Kisa nodded. Rick powered down the square and stuck it back in his satchel, looking all around the battered hut, trying to think. He saw old cooking tools and fallen boards and cloth. He saw a half-covered piece of wood that had been carved into a snake head. Rick knew he needed to tell Sera about the significance of today as soon as he possibly could. The historians really had led them here intentionally. It was now just a matter of figuring out why. Dozens of images flashed through his mind. Ichik leading them into his hut, the scribes coming up out of the rubble, the storm as seen from the mouth of the cave, Jassaw burning incense over Dak's lifeless body. "Is everything okay?" Kisa asked. "I'm not sure," Rick said. "I just know I need to get to Sera. You've helped us tremendously, Kisa, and please don't worry," Kisa said, cutting him off. "I will not mention the riddle to a soul." Rick nodded. "Thank you." "Be careful, Rick. I don't want anything to happen to you." Rick squeezed her hand and turned to leave, but he only made it as far as the open door before spinning back around. "I need to tell you something, Kisa. Something I've been thinking about all day." "What?" "The three of us, me, Dak, and Sera, we've been traveling from place to place trying to make the world better. It's a quest I prepared for my whole life, but I've realized something since we arrived at your village." Kisa held the ceiling board, waiting for Rick to finish. "Maybe helping the entire world is less important than helping a specific community, because with a community you can see faces, you can know them, and they can know you back." Rick returned to Kisa, took the board out of her hands, and studied it for a few seconds. "Who lived in this hut before the storm hit?" he asked. Kisa lowered her eyes. "Me and my family." Rick nodded. "You know, all my life I've cared more about a quest than I have about people. I believed having a friend would take my focus away from what was important. But I was wrong about that, Kisa. Having a friend is the most important thing in the world." "It's the most important thing for you, too?" Kisa asked. "From this day forward." "And are we friends?" Rick nodded. "I'd like to think we are, even though we haven't known each other very long." He handed the board back to Kisa. "Do you think it'd be okay if I stayed here and helped your village rebuild? It would be a great honor if your people would allow me to help." "We'd like that very much," Kisa said, dropping the board and taking his hands in hers. I only wish I could do something for you in return. Something just as important. You already have, Rick told her. His heart was racing, but at least the matter was settled. He would stay here and help Kisa and her family. Dak and Sera would be fine without him. They were the important time travelers, and when their mission was successful, Rick's life back home wouldn't be the same, if he even had a life there. Here, at least, he would serve a purpose. He would help rebuild a village, and he would be Kisa's friend. And maybe he could even assist the scribes when they started their next project. I have to go, Rick said. Sera needs to know what you've told me. And I have to help Mother with the children, Kisa said. Rick let go of Kisa's hands and started through the door when Kisa called out, And Rick? He turned around. Please be careful of those men. I don't want anything to happen to you. Nothing can happen to me now, Kisa. Rick left the hut and started running through the village, toward the ball courts. His legs and chest felt incredibly strong, like he could run forever, like nothing in the world could slow him down. Chapter 8. The Significance of Today. Sera sat in awe as Pakal opened the codex like an accordion and pointed to the top right section. Here, we show the path of Venus, he said. We tracked its movement in the sky for many years. Sera looked at the foreign glyphs. Her translation device did little to help her with archaic written text, but it was an amazing thing to see in person. This was the first written language on the entire continent, and it had an almost otherworldly beauty to it. Each glyph was a miniature work of art. After Sera had followed Itchik and the children to the ball courts, she had met the 4 visitors from Kalakmul. They were squatty, powerful-looking men with dark brown eyes and bushy brown hair. She also met the 3 scribes, Kokum, Kanboar, and Pakal. Itchik invited all the men to a special meal inside the temple, prepared by the best cooks in the village. Sera was all set to head back to the cave and check on Dak when Pakal announced that he would skip dinner and do a little more work. Sera was shocked when he then turned and asked if she wanted to accompany him. She jumped on the offer, thinking she might get a chance to see the codex up close. Past generations have followed the movements of the sun and moon and stars, Pakal went on. And in our first very amateur codex, we did the same thing. But in this much wiser version, I believe we are the first to have charted the course of Venus. Wait, Sera said. There's another codex? A very poor one. A learning experience, you might say, though that alone took us years. We call it our trial codex. I wanted it destroyed, but King Itchik insisted he keep it for reasons of nostalgia. She looked at Pakal, a short old man with bad teeth. There was something very familiar about him. Every time their eyes met, she had a strange déjà vu feeling. Not a remnant exactly, but close. How'd you see Venus without a telescope? Sera said. Telescope? Pakal asked. What is that? Never mind. Sera chided herself in her head. Of course he wouldn't know what a telescope was. Don't mind me, I tend to make up words when I'm tired. Pakal stared deep into her eyes, and Sera felt herself tumbling toward that déjà vu feeling again. Only this time, she saw the face of a man from her past, a man she hadn't thought about in years. She had been 3 years old, playing in the yard at her uncle's place, when a large van pulled up. Several men got out, and the leader walked into the property and talked to Sera's uncle. They had a long, spirited conversation, and then the man walked over to Sera. He'd smiled big and knelt down so he could stare deep into her eyes. He was an older man with long gray hair tied back into a braid and a dark, leathery face, the kind you might see at the top of a totem pole. He'd rubbed his chin, still smiling, and said, "You're going to be special, Sera. I can see it in your eyes. But you must understand, there is always a price to pay for being special. You must have strong shoulders." "Do you have strong shoulders, Sera?" She nodded, but didn't say a word. He'd stood up and said, "Good." Then he left, in the van with the other men. When Sera's uncle came over to her, he'd said, "You see how rude he is? He didn't even introduce himself." "Who was he?" Sera had asked, looking up at her uncle. "Your grandfather," he told her. That was exactly who Pakal reminded her of. The man who said she would be special. Her grandfather. Sera pulled herself out of her memory and asked Pakal, "So, why is Venus such a big deal anyway?" Pakal picked up his fine-tipped brush and began painting a ceiba tree on the last panel. "We have learned much from Venus," he said. "This planet tells us when it's best to plant each crop and when we need to prepare for battle." Sera tried to decide what she thought of basing real-life decisions on the path of a planet. It reminded her of kids at school who always wanted to know what sign of the horoscope everyone was. Sera had never understood that superstitious approach to life. She'd always been about hard science, but Pakal still seemed smart. "And this section here describes the work we've done with the calendar," Pakal said, pointing to the 5th panel. "Using the long count system, we've calculated the dates far into the future." Sera wished she could explain all the amazing things that happened from Pakal's time up to the modern day. He seemed like the kind of person who would want to hear about everything, but she couldn't go down that road. She had to keep the conversation on the calendar. "So, at any point, does your codex mention a curse?" "A curse?" "Yeah," Sera said. "A curse that says we're headed toward a cataclysm, and the only people who can save us are the SQ. "There is no curse in our codex," Pakal said. Sera tried another approach. "So, what happens when you get to the last date of your calendar? Will the world come to an end?" "Oh, no," Pakal said, laughing now. "That will only mark the end of a cycle. A new cycle will begin immediately after. We hope it is a time of even greater learning." They talked about other knowledge the scribes had shared in the codex, and something slowly happened in Sera's brain. She stopped listening quite as intently and started thinking about the error messages on the Infinity Ring again. She still had no idea what the date was, but the Maya kept track of time by another system. And it was an extremely detailed system based on decades of scientific observation and record-keeping. That meant raw data, which she could cross-reference with the data stored in the ring. Sera slipped the ring out of her satchel and stared at it. Pakal continued to paint the ceiba tree. At one point, he looked up at the ring and furrowed his brow. But instead of asking any questions, he went back to his codex. After a few minutes, he cleared his throat and said, "Can I offer a word of advice, Sera?" "I'm all ears," she answered. "I've come to believe that everything is of this earth, including you and me. The most complex human invention already existed in the soil. We do not make up new things out of thin air. We simply find already existing elements born of this earth and place them in new combinations. Progress is merely organization and creativity." Sera nodded, trying to process what she'd just heard. Pakal put down his paintbrush and reached into his bag. He turned his back on her. "And one other thing," he said. "Never forget the importance of laughter." He turned back around wearing a wooden clown mask, stuck his thumbs in his ears, and wiggled his fingers. "I usually only pull this out when I want to entertain small children." Sera definitely wasn't expecting this. "So wait, I'm like a small child to you?" "The best part of all of us is a child," he said. Sera cracked up a little. It was funny to see the village wise man goofing around with a silly mask. A few seconds later, an alarm went off in her head. The clown reference in the riddle. Maybe they'd already found the snake charmer and the clown. Before Sera could fire off all her questions for Pakal, though, Ichik pushed open the temple doors and led the 4 visitors from Kalakmul into the room, saying, "And here, my friends, is the surprise I told you about." He pointed at the codex. "Our greatest achievement of learning." The 4 men stood there nodding and staring at the codex as Pakal pulled off his clown mask and shoved it back in his bag. Ichik guided the visitors deeper into the temple, saying, "Pakal will describe for you all that our codex explains." Sera saw that one of the men was looking at the ring in front of her. She couldn't worry about that now, though. She was too busy reviewing all their previous coordinates. There was astronomical data there, which she cross-referenced with the codex's detailed information on Venus and the Moon. She was able to deduce a likely date. July 25th, 6:38. Her hypothesis was confirmed when she reprogrammed the ring settings and the error messages disappeared. She pumped her fist and shoved the ring back into her satchel and stood up. Pakal was now leading the 4 visitors through each panel. A second group of people shuffled into the temple as Pakal explained the calendar. A few locals, the other 2 scribes. "Sera," someone said. She saw Rick step into view and wave her over to him. As Pakal continued, Sera slipped around the visitors to get to Rick. "I'm so happy you showed up," she said. "I have major news." "Me too," he said. "I just spoke to Kisa. She helped me understand the numerical part of the riddle. Apparently, there are 2 dates listed." "And?" Rick seemed more excited than she'd ever seen him. "Sera, one of those dates is today." "Today?" Sera repeated. "See? We were supposed to come here all along, just like I thought. All we have to do now is figure out what's significant about today." Pakal was now speaking about the path of Venus. "That's huge," Sera said. "Speaking of the riddle, you'll never guess what that Pakal guy just pulled onto his face a few minutes before you got here." "What?" "A clown mask," Sera said. "He has to be the clown from the riddle." Rick's eyes grew big. "We're finally figuring this thing out," he said. Sera nodded and said, "Which makes me think Kisa really is the snake charmer. We just need to figure out what that means exactly. But here's the best news of all." She patted the satchel holding the Infinity Ring and said, "You're looking at the girl who just figured out how to eliminate all those error messages." "Are you serious?" Sera explained how Pakal's description of the Mayan calendar helped her figure it out. "The point is," she said, shoving Rick in the shoulder, "we can now leave whenever we want." "That's—" Rick suddenly looked concerned. "I mean, great work, Sera." "What's wrong?" she asked. "What? Nothing. Are you sure?" Rick nodded. "Of course I'm sure. But we should probably concentrate on the significance of today's date for now, right?" "Definitely," Sera said. She turned when she noticed 2 of the visitors heading for the door. One of them glanced at her before stepping outside the temple. Sera held a finger up to Rick and moved toward the group of Mayas listening to Pakal. "Where did they go?" she asked Kokom. "To meet up with the rest of their men," he answered. "They said the storm set them back and they need to make it to the next village by morning." "They're not even staying the night?" Sera mumbled to herself as she moved back toward Rick. That seems sort of weird. It was 20 more minutes before Pakal finished explaining the final panel of the codex. The 2 remaining visitors were beyond impressed. They raved to Ichik, who had a big smile on his face, and they patted Pakal on the shoulder, and then the smaller of them began folding up the codex, saying, "Yuknum the Great will be honored to display this in the very center of our empire." Ichik's smile quickly faded. "We can't let the codex leave Itzamal, of course, but King Yuknum is welcome to send his own scribes here to make a reproduction." "Oh no," one of the visitors said. "The king was very specific about this. We are to bring back all of the great achievements we encounter on our journey." Ichik glanced at his own men behind him. "I'm sorry, friends," he said, moving forward. "I cannot allow—" "Stay where you are," the larger of the 2 visitors said, pulling a large obsidian blade from a pouch on his belt and holding it out toward Ichik. "I will make this simple. We are taking the codex back to Calakmul, with or without your consent." Sera and Rick looked at each other, wide-eyed. The man pulled Pakal toward him and put the knife to his neck. "You don't want us to harm the wise old man, do you? Understand, I have over 24 men out there waiting for us. If anyone follows us, there will be terrible consequences, including the loss of one of your own." All the local men, including Ichik, stepped back as the two visitors exited the temple, shoving Pakal to the floor. As soon as they were gone, everyone spoke at once, and Sera couldn't understand a thing. She went over and helped Pakal to his feet. "Silence!" Ichik shouted. The room went quiet. "We are not going to let anyone take our codex," Ichik began. "And more important, nobody touches our precious Pakal. Now, we need to organize a large group to go after these men. Kokum, go alert the warriors and have the cooks prepare several days' worth of rations. Kanboar, I need you to prepare a map with all the possible routes to Calakmul. A few of us will follow them now, because I'm not so sure about the extra men they claim to have, and others will cut them off from the front. Men, we will not return without our codex." Rick turned to Sera and said, "I'm going with them." "It's not a good idea," Sera said. "You said yourself, we need to stick together." "I know, Sera, but I have to help them right now. This may be the very reason we're here." She nodded. "I'll go check on Dak. I want us to be prepared to leave immediately." Sera watched Rick join the small group of Mayan men who were about to go after the visitors who had taken the codex. One of the men handed Rick a crude version of a sword. Rick turned and met eyes with Sera, and then turned back to the man giving instructions. Sera could tell something had changed in Rick. She just didn't know what it was. She slipped out the door and started toward the cave. It was still light out, but the sun was low on the horizon. She moved out of the village and began climbing the path up to the cave when a man suddenly stepped out in front of her. It was one of the visitors who had left the temple early, the one who had stared at the Infinity Ring. Sera instinctively turned to run the other way, but she ran right into the arms of the other visitor who had left early. He spun her around to face the first man, who said, "We came here because we heard rumors about the wisdom of the local codex, but we will leave with more than that." He pointed at Sera's satchel and said, "Remove the device from the back." "What device?" Sera said, trying to wiggle her way out of the other man's grasp. "You know the one I'm speaking of," he said, moving toward her. "Remove the device and show me what it does." Chapter 9. The Comeback Kid. Dak had been dreaming for what seemed like days, and it was all one continuous dream. He had fallen into the deep well by his parents' house, and now he was slowly trying to climb out, but he could only climb a step at a time because he had to dig out each new handhold into the soft rock with a set of keys. He'd dig for hours and hours with the sharpest key, one of the keys that opened his parents' secret lab, and then he'd test the carved-out gap with his fingers. If it were deep enough to get a good grip, he would pull himself up, shoving his foot into one of the holes he'd previously dug. Every once in a while, there would be a voice above him. He couldn't see because the sky was pitch black, but he didn't need to see to know whose voice it was. He'd been listening to Sera blabber all his life. She spoke to him about their mission and her worries, but she also read him the Mayan riddle, over and over, to the point that he now had it memorized. But something was changing about his dream now. He was no longer digging handholds with the lab keys. He was using the key his parents had given him when he'd seen them in 9/11 France. And the hole above him was growing lighter, like morning was taking over the sky above the well. And the voice calling to him was no longer Sera, but someone else, a different girl. And soon Dak found himself right up near the top of the well, and this new girl who wasn't Sera reached for his hand and lifted him up into the light until he fell over the lip of the well and opened his eyes, shouting, "I've got it! I figured out the riddle!" "What?" the girl said. He was startled to find himself not on the ground beside a well, but in a dingy cave with the faces of two strangers hovering above him. One of the faces, the female one, belonged to a girl he remembered from the Mayan hut that crumbled in the storm. He winced as the memory of the falling wall flashed to his head. The other face belonged to an old, wrinkly dude who had a bunch of feathers sticking up around his dome. "Dak?" the girl said. "Can you hear me?" Dak sprang up to a sitting position and looked around. He was behind a hanging blanket, surrounded by dozens of flower bouquets and plates of food. "Where am I?" he demanded. "You're awake," the girl said. Then she turned to the feather dude and shouted, "He's awake!" "You should remain lying down," the man told Dak. But Dak wasn't in a lying down kind of mood. "Where's Sera?" he demanded. "And Rick, what'd you do with my friends?" "They're both down in the village," the girl said. "You were knocked unconscious in my uncle's hut. People carried you here so you could rest and our healer could take care of you." She pointed at the man next to her. "This is Jasa, and I'm Kisa." Dak rubbed his eyes and looked all around, the back of his head throbbing. "And do you see all these gifts around you?" the girl asked him. "Tough to miss," Dak said, stretching out his stiff neck. "They're from the people of my village. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened to my cousin." "No need to toss roses," Dak told her, his thoughts finally clearing. "That's just sort of what I do, Kisa." "What do you mean?" "I save lives." The girl didn't even crack a smile. "Well, we are all very much in your debt." Dak shrugged and reached down for what looked like a hunk of good old American cheese, but as soon as he took a bite, he realized it was squash and spit it back onto the plate, cursing himself because America hadn't even been founded yet, so how could there be American cheese? He wiped his mouth on his bare arm and motioned toward the healer. "This dude doesn't have a whole lot to say." The man was putting herbs into little wooden boxes. "He's been busy because of the storm. Several people were injured." Kisa moved closer and looked right into Dak's eyes. She turned to the healer and said, "Do you think he's okay to walk down to the village?" "Not a good idea, but the boy is free to do what he thinks he can." Kisa turned back to Dak and said, "I'm sorry to weigh you down with troubles when you're just now feeling better, but I kind of need your help. I'm worried about your friends, actually." Dak felt a surge of energy and stood up. "Something happened to Sera?" "Well, I'm not sure yet," Kisa said. "I'm just worried because—" "Let's stop wasting time," he interrupted. "We need to go find her, now." "Are you sure you're well enough to walk?" she said. "Of course I'm sure," he told her. "I could run a marathon if I needed to, or lift a car, or jump over a malaria-infested stream." He jumped up and down a few times to prove himself. "See?" Dak promptly fainted into Kisa's arms. As they left the cave, Dak's arm wrapped around Kisa's shoulder for support. Kisa said, "When you woke up, you said something about solving a riddle? What did you mean by that?" "Have you ever heard of the historians?" Dak asked. "Only from you and Rick." "Have you ever heard of a time warden?" Kisa shook her head. "That's because they don't exist here yet. Neither group has infiltrated the Americas in this era. That's my theory, at least." "What are the Americas?" Kisa asked. Dak took his arm from around Kisa's shoulder. "I'm feeling better," he said. "I think I can make it on my own." He stretched his neck again and reached back to feel the lump on the back of his head. "Anyway, the specifics are not important. The main thing is the question of why we've been sent here. That's what I figured out." "And?" "We're here to protect your codex, to ensure that it is not destroyed by the Spanish conquistadors who are eventually going to invade your land and try to convert you to their own ideologies. It's censorship 101, Kisa. Control the masses by controlling the acquisition of information. Your codex is the treasure that never was." "I'm not understanding many of the things you're saying." "It's not important, my fair lady. The point is, there are no historians in Mayan territory, therefore there's no one here to properly secure the codex, which I believe is a very important document. Enter myself, Sera, and Rick." "There needs to be historians here, then," Kisa said. "Preaching to the choir, my friend, preaching to the choir. But this is exactly why I came for you, Dak. Some men showed up in the village today, and Ichik, my man Itchy," Dak interrupted. How is that guy? He never calls, he never writes. He's well, Kisa said, flustered. Ichik believes they only want to study the Codex, but I'm afraid they have come here to take it for their own. The people from Kalakmul believe they have a right to anything they want. Dak stopped and turned to Kisa. Trust me, we're not going to let that happen. Good, she said. They walked halfway down the lush tropical path before Dak heard voices. He stopped again and held Kisa back by the arm. He put a finger to his lips as a sign for her to keep quiet, and then he crept up the path a few more paces until he had an obscured view of a short, squatty man who kept peeking back over his shoulder like he was acting as a lookout man. Dak crept up a little closer, and he saw the heads of two others in the bushes, a man and a girl with brown hair. Dak's heart climbed up into his throat. The man was holding a knife to the girl's throat, and the girl was Sera. And the lookout man was holding the Infinity Ring. It was like a great big deja vu moment. Last time he had sprinted at the pack and tackled the man holding the ring, and it had been a mistake. But as Dak sat there studying the scene, he realized something. He would always race to help Sera when she appeared to be in danger. He didn't care how many times it was a mistake. There was no way he would ever be able to just sit back and let something possibly happen to her. No way. Not on his watch. He stood up, still a bit wobbly on his feet, and then he sprinted at the man holding the Infinity Ring, just like he had a few days earlier, yelling, "Nobody messes with my friends!" Only this time, he sidestepped that man at the last second and plowed into the man holding a knife to Sera's throat. The knife went flying, and so did Dak and the man. "Dak!" Sera shouted. "Dak!" Kisa shouted. Dak and the man both tumbled into the jungle brush, and the back of Dak's already wounded head smacked into a tree. He was dazed. The whole jungle swirled around him. He could hear details of sound he'd never heard before, the whining of mosquitoes and the hot wind rustling the leaves of every tree in the jungle, and the songs of faraway birds and the cracking of twigs as he scrambled back to his feet without even telling himself to scramble back to his feet. He found himself face to face with the man he'd just knocked over. The man was grinning. "Glad you could join us," he said. Over the man's shoulders, Dak saw Sera and Kisa trying to wrestle the other guy to the ground. The Infinity Ring lay in the grass near their feet. He lunged for the man again, but the Maya stepped to the side and threw Dak to the ground. He looked up at the man, who was still grinning, knowing Dak was no match, especially in his current physical condition. And Dak saw that the other dude now had Sera and Kisa pinned to the ground, a firm grip on each of their necks. It was over. The man in front of Dak stepped on Dak's back and told his friend, "Release the younger girl," he said. The man did, and Sera stood up, looking very hesitant. "Dak," she said, "you're okay." "Well, technically not at the moment," he said, pointing up at the man standing on him. "But yeah, I'm no longer bedridden. What's going on here?" "I'll tell you what's going on," the man above him said. "We came here to retrieve a local codex, but we've stumbled into something potentially even greater. This metal thing your friend has. Our king, Yuknum the Great, will be very happy," the other man said. "He'll be even more satisfied when we understand how to use it." The man standing on Dak reached down for his obsidian knife. He dug a knee into Dak's back and held the knife to his neck. "So we're clear about things," he said to Sera. "You're going to explain how the item works, or I'm going to slice your little friend into several pieces." "Easy with all that little talk," Dak said. "Besides, the item in question no longer even works. Tell him how I broke it, Sera." Sera shot him an uneasy look. "Wait, you fixed it?" Dak said. "Sort of." "How could you?" "Quiet," the man kneeling on Dak said. "If you continue talking, I'll slice you up just to get some peace and quiet. Now go on." He motioned for Sera to pick up the ring. Sera slowly reached down, pulled the ring off the grass. "First of all," the man continued, "what is it?" Lie to him, Dak thought. Make something up. Tell him it's a can opener." "It's a time-traveling device," Sera said. Dak let his face fall into the grass. "It allows you to warp to whatever era you program into it," Sera went on. "We are from the future." The man holding down Dak looked at his friend and said, "Are you hearing this? We will be legends in Calakmul." "Yugnum will build temples in our honor," the man replied. Dak lifted his head. Sera was holding the ring out for the men to see. Kisa was squeezing her eyes shut like she was injured. "How do you go to another time?" the man above Dak asked. "It's simple," Sera said. "You just program in—" Sera?" Dak interrupted. "Maybe a little less detail here?" "As I was saying," Sera said, keeping her eyes on the man, "you just program in your desired year and geographic location, and the machine will take you there. But there's a catch." "And what is that?" "The machine will not work unless the three of us," she gestured to herself, Dak, and Kisa, "are in physical contact with it. It is programmed to respond only to our DNA." The squat man looked at his friend. "What is DNA?" Kisa began humming in a strange way, like it was helping her manage the pain, and her eyes were still squeezed shut. The other guy shrugged. "Who cares? Let's just take the machine and let the king worry about it from there." "DNA," Sera said, "is a nucleic acid that contains the specific genetic code of each unique organism. In other words, it's a way to decipher that you are you and I am me. No two people have the same DNA. And the machine, as I've already explained, will only work if it is in direct contact with the DNA of all three of us." "The girl is deranged," the squat man said. "Oh, I disagree," the man above Dak said. "In fact, she's giving me an idea. If this thing needs something from each of them in order to work, then we simply cut off a hand from all three of them. We will bring back to Calakmul the codex, this machine, and 3 hands." "It's genius," the other man said. Dak's captor brought his obsidian knife down to Dak's wrist. He began a sawing motion. Dak screamed. "Dak!" Sera shouted. But the man kept sawing, and Dak was pinned in such an awkward position he couldn't even move. And then, suddenly, the man began shouting, "No, please!" And he let go of Dak and hopped off him. The other man was shouting too. Dak twisted around to see what was going on. He spotted a few large snakes slithering out of the dense jungle foliage. Their tongues whipped around outside of their mouths and then sucked back in. Dak and Sera both started screaming too. Kisa just lay there, cringing in pain. But an odd thing happened. The snakes slithered right over Kisa. They appeared to be converging on the 2 Mayan men, ignoring the kids entirely. "It's witchcraft!" cried the man with the knife. "Run!" yelled the other. As soon as the men had disappeared into the trees, the snakes dispersed. It was hard to tell whether they were in pursuit or simply passing through. Dak staggered to his feet, holding his wrist. "What just happened?" Sera pointed to Kisa, who was now sitting up. "Did she just save our lives?" Dak looked at Kisa, who was fingering the locket around her neck. "Sometimes I come out here when I'm bored, and I hum to them, but nothing like this ever happened." Dak turned to Sera. "Dude, she's like one of those guys who plays the flute or whatever and gets a snake to dance around." "Maybe," said Sera. "Maybe they were just migrating? Do snakes migrate?" "You have to go find Rick now," Kisa said. "What about you?" Dak said. "I need to be alone for a few minutes. I will be right behind you." Dak turned to Sera and shrugged. "Come on," said Sera. "I think I know which way Rick was headed."